somewhere in between. And nobody has a damn clue, let's be honest. Todd here is ex-Unity, recently ex-Unity, VP of Online Services. Unity, as you know, is obviously used by 3 million developers. And Todd used to lead Unity's new initiative to revolutionize the way developers created their games as part of Unity's 10-year mission of democratizing game development. Okay, and he's going to lead a discussion today about where VR is going and what we can expect and what hopefully happens afterwards. So, take it away, Todd.
Thanks. I'll give you guys an extra mic. Okay, which one of these guys am I using? This one or this one? This one? Second? All right, great. Okay, so, you know, I didn't do my homework and write up a fantastic intro for all you guys, because I thought it'd be better for you to introduce yourselves. So, Forrest, would you like to start and introduce yourself? Tell us who you are and what you're working on in VR.
Okay, well, my name's Forrest Gibson. I'm the co-founder of Pluto VR. We are a company focused on building multi-user VR experiences, so really about getting people together to connect, communicate, and collaborate, regardless of where they are in the world.
Cool.
John Mavor, founder of Uber Entertainment, EvelopVR, and PlayFab. So I get around a lot, apparently. We're really investing heavily in VR right now, both on the game and non-game side. So we think it's going to be the next big wave of computing.
I'm Nick Whiting. I'm the lead VR and visual scripting programmer at Epic Games. And I'm kind of a newcomer to this. I've only been doing it for about 2.5, 3 years. But Epic in general has been kind of really getting behind VR and trying to support all the fun new toys that this guy and other people make next to us. So we're really excited about where things go.
I'm Joe Ludwig. I'm on the VR team at Valve. We're working on OpenVR, sharing a bunch of technology with HTC to help them bring out the Vive, the HTC Vive later this year.
Awesome, great. So just to get a show of hands in the audience here, how many people have actually used the Oculus headset in the past? All right, so quite a few. And how many have used the Valve headset? Not so many. A little bit more work to do there. So, you know, anyone who's seen the Matrix remembers Morpheus said this fantastic line of, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You actually have to experience it for yourself. And are we having that kind of problem with VR? Because I went to a conference recently where a lot of gaming people, and the ones that had tried especially the Valve experience, were very positive on VR, and the folks that hadn't really didn't believe. So is it one of those things where people just really have to put on a headset and try for themselves? You can't explain it?
We've pretty much gotten to the point where we won't even talk to people until they get the demo first,
right.
Because the conversation completely changed. They changed from sort of being skeptical and, you know, maybe it'll work this time, maybe it won't, to where do I sign up, how do I get a dev kit? So,
what do you think, Forrest?
We actually experience this on 2 levels, which makes it a little more complicated. We have not only the first level, which is if they've never tried VR, then we wait until they've tried VR. And then if they've never tried multi-user VR, then we have to wait until they've tried multi-user VR, because explaining what it's like to be present with someone else virtually doesn't work unless they experience it.
Right, got it.
So this is actually it's a short-term problem, right, due to lack of hardware, I think, because people do get sold when they see it. We've actually been spending a lot of time, because we're raising money in this space, educating VCs and other investors, and I've seen every possible reaction that you can possibly see, including this will never take off because it will mess up your hair, which
I don't have that problem.
Todd doesn't have that problem, but you know, a lot of people do, and but I do think seeing is believing, but there's certainly skeptics out there.
I think it took a long time internally. Like VR started just because I was buddies with the guys that ended up starting Oculus, and they sent me this crazy contraption. And they're like, hey, you should throw this in the engine. And so I got it, and I was super hooked on it as soon as I did it. But it took about a good year to get other people at Epic on board with it, and a lot of that was due to them coming out here and actually trying, you know, the Valve full room experience, or trying the new later Oculus dev kits. So it's very hard until somebody's had that kind of transformative moment and putting it on their face. But I noticed the other thing that kind of going around to conventions and stuff like this that's happening is there's a lot of bad VR content out there that makes people nauseous and makes them super hesitant to ever try it again. So I think we're still kind of battling that a little bit, because it's such a new medium, and people aren't used to making high quality content, or maybe just aren't even informed of what the potential pitfalls are, that we have to be very careful that not only we show people VR, but we show them good VR, or it turns them off for a long period of time.
Right, and John, one of your guys gave a talk yesterday on good VR. And why do you think there's so much bad stuff? Are people just lazy, or?
I don't think people are lazy, but I do think that it's a completely new medium, and when you come into a new medium, you have to acknowledge that the lessons of the past don't all apply. So he's referring to the talk that Eka gave yesterday on Good VR. We're working on it for about 10 months now. We've had a game under development that's a from-the-ground-up VR title, and there are many, many lessons that you're going to learn the first time you're doing it, which is why we tried to get in early and do it now, because we want to know what those lessons are. So it's not laziness, it's just a lot of work, and I'm sure that Valve and Epic are seeing this as well, where there's just a steep learning curve here.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things we've learned about building experience in VR that they're not obvious, right? You expect things are going to work one way, and you go and try that, and it doesn't work at all, and you expect something else won't work at all, and you try it, and it works great. So
what's your thought on Team Fortress 2 at this point?
We learned a ton from doing the VR ports of TF2. We actually, not everyone may know this, but we ported Team Fortress 2 and a little bit later Half-Life 2 to the Rift DK1, and we actually shipped about a week before the Rift DK1 did. And it's an experience that can make people sick pretty easily, because you're running around at 20 miles an hour playing the Scout and looking around, and it taught us a lot about sort of how to do the interaction, how to deal with HUDs, and how to deal with combining mouse input and head tracking input. And in a lot of cases, it taught us to just not do that.
So I think the big lesson there is learn from your experience, right? I mean, you guys have publicly said, hey, here's what we ran into, and if there's any part of developers that are lazy, it's maybe not learning from that experience.
Yeah, I think another kind of thing that it's mirroring kind of the old film revolution. When film first came out, the first thing they did was just record plays from a static camera angle, right? Because it was what was familiar, and people hadn't played around with the new medium. And then you got things where they put a camera on the tracks and had a train run over it, and people were blown away because nobody's ever laid under a train going over them and lived to tell about it. But games are the most kind of familiar medium to VR, I think, because it's real-time interactive entertainment. And I think a lot of people are just saying, hey, I can just take my game experience and throw a VR headset, and it's cool. And there's a lot of issues with that. Like you said, Half-Life and TF2 can make you pretty sick out of the box because we're not superhumans. So I think once people kind of get past the, let's play around with stuff that's less familiar, I think it'll start being better in general.
One of the things that Eka mentioned yesterday was that games tend to borrow a lot of tricks from Hollywood with big cinematic camera moves and things like that, and they're actually just the wrong things to do in VR, which is kind of what we learned from TF2, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of games, like I'm playing Far Cry 4 with my wife right now.
Yep.
And there are a lot of places in that game where they just take camera control away from you, and the camera is wiggling around as you're skinning some animal or you're climbing up something. And if you do that in VR, you're going to make everybody sick.
The one funny story I like to tell is after someone had done the Eve Valkyrie demo, they were saying, "Oh man, I kind of feel a little nauseous. I wasn't moving around a lot, but I felt nauseous." And I was saying, "Well, have you flown like a fighter jet before?" And they're like, "Well, no." I'm like, "Okay, well, you should do that because that probably will also make you nauseous."
Right,
right. This is what you said. We're not superhumans. Like,
right.
you can't put yourself in that scenario and expect you'll be fine because you're present in there.
Yeah, right. So if people were going to go out today and buy a commercial game that has VR support, what's the best game out there that you guys have seen that's commercially available?
I've barely played it myself, but I hear a lot of good things about Elite Dangerous. Yeah.
Elite Dangerous. Unanimous on that?
I think so.
As far as
There you
commercially
go.
available, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's just not a lot out there right
Right.
now. I mean, that's kind of one of the only games that's fully kind of fleshed out in a.
I would agree. It's one of the best ones. It's interesting that the simulators like that and Eve Valkyrie seem to be the first sort of crop of VR that we've seen out there so far. So Nick, you talked about Hollywood, and there seems to be a huge influx of Hollywood people into this VR scene, which most of us here come from a gaming background, but they seem to see it as a next wave of the way to get movies out there. Do you think that's a real thing? Do you think people are actually going to enjoy watching filmed experiences in VR? Because to me, it feels kind of passive, just sitting back. Yeah, it's kind of all around me. That's nice, but it's not a game, so to speak. So, you guys have opinions on that?
Yeah, I think part of the reason that Hollywood, I think, is so interested in is they've been doing, digital pre-visualization for movies for so long, so they've got this kind of really good stable of assets that they could use to repurpose them for VR because they're, low res. They're not the hero pieces from the movie, but they run really performantly on modern gaming hardware. So I think there's a lot of interest to try to remonetize a lot of that work that's already been done. So there's like, hey, maybe we could have a kind of a 3 or 4 minute piece that's in addition to it, kind of like a DVD extra, the next sort of, transmedia DVD extra, I guess.
Right.
So we worked recently porting some of the Hobbit content, took the dragon from the Hobbit movies and made like a 3 to 4 minute experience around it. And just putting people in there and getting a different kind of perspective on it, it's cool because it's very novel. I mean, people haven't been in the room with a giant dragon before and talking to them, which is another one of those things that's pretty cool. But, I think we'll see as, the technology and our kind of grammar in the VR medium becomes more and more advanced, you can actually start to make some kind of substantial narrative elements in that, branching stories and kind of a little, choose your own adventure sort of bit in the movie because you have that presence in the world.
Right.
I think it's going to fall into the category of marketing material for quite a while, especially when the expectations of production value in those things are really high, because it would be really hard and expensive to make a VR movie right now, and then there wouldn't be enough people to buy it. I actually think that while a lot of Hollywood people are flooding in, the people who will ultimately be better at doing this are theater people, especially people who are used to working in theater in the round or promenade theater, because film is about control. Film is about controlling the camera. It's about controlling exactly where you're looking. It's about controlling all those things. And telling a film director, oh, you can't control any of that, doesn't really work, while someone who's a film or a theater director understands you can't control a person's head.
Right, got it. Cool.
I want to make a couple of predictions along this line. First of all, I think to me, anyway, after discussing this with several filmmakers, I kind of come to the same conclusion that you have. It's going to be a new, different thing. It's not really clear what form VR cinema is going to take, but it's not going to be anything like traditional cinema for sure. But I do think it is going to be an actual thing. And furthermore, I think that that is going to create a whole generation of people that don't actually like watching boring old films, even though they're super great. In the same way that a lot of people don't like reading books. It's an evolution of what we're into. So we'll see if I'm right. Let's look back in like 20 years and see if VR filmmaking is a thing or not.
We'll just meet up here in 20 years.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So you mentioned control of the camera in film. Something that's interesting in VR that you notice is the first time people put on a headset, they look down at their hands and they can't see them. And the display technology has been a lot further ahead than the control technology and the input technology. So where do you guys see that going? There's a lot of things out there. Obviously, Valve has got their Lighthouse tech. We've seen things like Leap Motion and Kinect type tracking. Obviously, you've got your Xbox controller as a fallback. But what is the ultimate form you guys see that taking? That's something that everyone's going to be able to have access to.
I have no idea what the ultimate form is. We thought it was good to put a stake in the ground and pick a kind of input that we knew we could do at a very high quality. And so that's what we did. One controller in each hand with relatively small number of buttons gives you a lot of ability to affect what's going on in the world. Where it goes from there, who knows? We think this is the beginning of it, not the end of it.
Right. So we've been lucky enough to actually experiment and kind of see at least where we think the future's going. Having purchased a full motion capture system and used it to do full body motion capture. So putting on the headset, but then having an entire body, including the bottom of your own shoe, all those things, and that once you have that, it's a whole different experience. When that will happen, when the Kinect or some other tracking solution comes out, I have no idea. But we feel very strongly about input and separating it from just kind of novelty. Input's your mouse and keyboard. Input needs to work more than 99% of the time. And that if your keyboard only worked 75% of the time, how long would you be using it? And that's what I see with everything, but that's why we're interested in the Vive controllers and things like that, because it's a reliable stake in the ground that we know, this is very limited. We don't have the whole body, we don't have all these things, but we have at least this.
So the Vive controllers are definitely great, but as you pointed out, mouse and keyboard is kind of the way that we interact with computers right now. So, some of the stuff that we're doing on the game side, not so much mouse and keyboard, but on the other stuff that we're working on, mouse and keyboard is actually still our primary input interface. And we've been working on how do we map the mouse into 3D, how do we, get your keyboard in there so that you can see it, and all these other kinds of problems, which I kind of feel like we have some decent solutions for at this point. So I think you're going to see, full room Vive style VR is going to be a thing, and it's super amazing. But I also think there's kind of a sit down, use your mouse and keyboard, interact with your computer kind of an experience there as well. So the ultimate thing everyone knows. By the way, I'm surprised you didn't know this, Joe. Your crystal ball must be cracked. It's obviously implanting some kind of shunt in our brain. I think that's going to happen too. Let's meet up in 20 years and see if we're all. We'll just meet virtually, right? By that point, with the shunt in our brain.
Yeah.
I think going back to what kind of Forrest said about when your input method fails, that 25%, even if it's only 25% of the time, it's highly frustrating. We've noticed too, it's kind of highly disturbing. If depending on what you're doing in VR, we had some kind of motion mapped characters in the game. And whenever we would lose tracking or something, and their arm would start flipping out and doing the IK spasm thing, people would
terrible.
They would freak out. I mean, it was a traumatic experience. I'm surprised we didn't give our office lady PTSD.
So it's actually, yeah. So there's one thing in our experimentation that we've learned is how to make an awesome horror film.
Yeah.
Because when you're using motion capture and you bump one of the cameras and it misaligns everything and your body starts doing this, doing these terribly disturbing things, we know how to scare people. So that's a good fallback. VR doesn't work, we got horror down.
Yep.
Also, spider silhouettes in the headset. That you just have a little spider like in the corner of there, just a little black thing. Freaks them out good.
Joe, you mentioned the Valve technology for input tracking, which is people referring to as Lighthouse. Maybe we could talk about why that's so revolutionary. Like previously it was camera-based, and now you guys have gone with this inside-out tracking. I think that's been a pretty big development this year in input. So
the two sort of more traditional kinds of tracking that people talk about are outside in, where there's a camera in the environment that's looking at the user, and inside out, where there's a camera attached to the track device that's looking at the environment. And we've built tracking systems using both of those, and Lighthouse is some sort of weird hybrid of the two of them. Because how Lighthouse works is there's a base station sitting in the corner that's sending out laser beams that are received by sensors on the active device, which is the receiver, the controller, the headset. And what this has allowed us to do is to track essentially an arbitrary number of devices. So right now we have two hands and one head, but we could drape your body with other sensors or track any number of other objects that you may or may not be touching at the moment. And we can do that because the amount of data involved is much smaller. Where a camera has a field of view and a resolution that's going to cause that number of pixels to be processed every single frame. Lighthouse has a laser that sweeps across the room that doesn't care how many things it's going to hit. So it's completely indifferent to the number of devices. And each device can have its own local processing to handle the actual sensor feedback. So we think the combination of those two things actually is pretty powerful and will unlock a lot of new tracking applications.
So I actually wrote a Facebook description of this last night because someone had seen your demo and they were like, what's with the laser scanning the room or whatever? And so I explained it, but I think it's absolutely genius, and the scaling factor that you're talking about is a huge, big deal. So I love this technology for tons and tons of reasons. If you think about cameras, or if you've used any of the more advanced camera-based solutions, they have a bandwidth problem, right? You have to have your PC configured in such a way that you can get a camera or multiple cameras feeding enough data into the system that gets processed every frame. And then if you do want to track additional objects, you have to throw more CPU at it. So it's really a much better, awesome solution. So kudos to you guys for coming up with that. I think it's gonna last for a while and be a great solution.
I think the other cool thing about the Lighthouse setup is it's much easier just to have a bunch of other people in the space since you have a whole room set up. Right. We've seen people talking about, hey, I want to have other people that aren't in VR, interacting with the person that is in VR by moving props and stuff around, and just, have kind of interaction on a human level while one person happens to be in VR. And I think the fact that it's so easy just to track as much stuff as you want in the same volume, that opens up the door, which is really, really cool.
And Joe, you guys said you're going to open source the technology as well?
We're going to open it up in some way. We don't know the details yet, but we want basically everything that ought to be tracked to have Lighthouse sensors on it, including the mouse and keyboard that you're.
Absolutely. In fact, the Lighthouse kind of a mouse is something that I was hoping that you would mention because I think that's going to be pretty cool.
Cool. One thing that, John, you mentioned earlier was lenses. There's a lot of discussion about field of view and lens technology, and someone's got a 100-degree field of view and someone else claims 150 degrees. Are we kind of hitting I'd like to see a discussion about like what that means, because some people may not be familiar with the technology involved, but are we also kind of hitting like the laws of physics and modern lens design as well with VR?
I don't think we're hitting the laws of physics so much as we're hitting the laws of practicality and cost.
Right.
Because I've seen VR lenses. Microsoft for Research has been doing some stuff. I can talk about this because I think they're publishing the paper on it or whatever, but they replaced the lenses in the DK2 with glass high-quality ones. Yes, they're heavier, but holy cow, they are absolutely astoundingly amazing. No chromatic aberrations. They don't have to turn that part on. The images look crisp. Really, to me, a big game changer in terms of seeing like what a DK2 can do just with better lenses. So I actually am at the point where I think there's going to be, unless the lenses in the shipping products get much, much better, I think we're going to see a secondary market emerge for professional quality VR headsets and lenses, or maybe just lenses, I don't know. And I'm curious what Joe thinks about all this, because he's got a lot more experience than I do in this area.
So you mentioned field of view and how people compare them, and that's a really weird number, because with the lenses that most of these systems are using, it's not the same depending on where your eye is in the eye box.
Right.
So if you're looking straight ahead at something and you see something out of the corner of your eye and then you look at it, it won't be there anymore because you'll be outside the field of view. You can see a bigger field of view when you're looking straight ahead than if you're looking out at an angle. The lenses we're using, the Vive, are ones that we've been developing the last couple of years that are weird in that most traditional uses of Fresnel lenses are not to look through; they're to like focus light for some other purpose. And I don't feel like we've hit the end of that. There are a lot of other strange things that could go on with micro lens arrays, or there's an optical device that I'm not sure what it's called, but it's basically a round bundle of little fiber optic pipes that, when you put over a display, makes the display look curved, even though even though the pipes are not all the same length, it looks as though the surface of the display has now just moved forward somewhere, between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. So there's all sorts of weird stuff out there, and a lot of things are going to happen optically that we don't even know yet.
So this is just Gen 1, what we're seeing right now, you think?
Maybe 2.
Gen 2.
I was going to say, and there's other technology still lurking about that. You hear about Magic Leap, and if you go and look at their patents, they have some pretty crazy vibrate fiber optic things right into your retina kind of stuff that seems very futuristic. And you'd think that if Google and other partners invested $500 million, they might be onto something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, John put the bug in my ear the other day, like, would you pay a couple $100 for extra premium lenses? And, people spend, $500, $1,000 more for a better TV that has, better image quality and whatnot. I don't see why that wouldn't be the same. Market for aftermarket lenses on these devices doesn't seem out of reach.
You think it'll be like Ready Player One? There'll be like super premium rigs that you can buy that are better than what everyone else has?
There will definitely be more premium rigs. Like even for Lighthouse, we think we can get the BOM cost of a perfectly adequate base station, sub-millimeter tracking, good range.
Yep.
But if you're willing to pay $1,000 for a base station, then you probably could get a better base station.
Right.
And if that incremental improvement is important to you, then maybe you'll do that. The reason I say it's generation 2 is that the way that we started 3 years ago, Palmer Luckey, when he built that first Rift prototype, he got a kid's magnifying glass. He popped the lens out of it, and he taped it into some ski goggles.
Right.
So it used to be that we, just a few years ago, we were using found lenses. We were using lenses that were built for some other purpose. All the devices that are actually going to ship will have custom molded lenses, and once you mold a lens, it's not actually that expensive. So the practicality is really there. So you can get pretty much whatever lens shape you want. It's the development cost and the development time and figuring out how to get to the point where you can manufacture it in quantity that's difficult.
So when you manufacture those, though, to me, there's a big difference between unscratchable or hard to scratch, like really good quality glass versus say, plastic and that kind of stuff. So don't you see there being a trade-off there?
So the index of refraction for many kinds of plastic is better, so you have more flexibility than you do with glass, or higher, I should say. Not really a value judgment that higher index of refraction is better. And there are coatings you can put on things to help, help them be more scratch resistant. None of the development lenses end up with those coatings.
So what you're saying is like the consumer versions of a lot of stuff that we're seeing is going to be better than the kind of dev versions.
That's true across the board. There's really not the prototype Vive units that we showed at GDC that dev kits are going out soon. Those are going to be exceeded in every way by the consumer version.
Cool.
Awesome. John, you're known as a guy who likes to build his own game engine, and right next to you is a guy, and I used to work at a company that's known for one game engine for everyone. And it's interesting, actually, if you look at games like Elite and a couple other games I played that are really good VR games, they're actually not using Unreal or Unity. What are some of the trade-offs there? It seems like some people got ahead of the curve with proprietary tech and actually put out a decent VR game, which wasn't what I was expecting, to be honest.
Honestly, I don't think I'm writing any more game engines because
You're done.
well, it's not. It's every year that's gone by, the engines that are out there have become more capable, and it's really difficult to come up with a game that you can't make work. I kind of tried to. I mean, honestly, kind of tried to do that with Planetary Annihilation. Like I kind of tried to make a game that wouldn't work with the current engine because I wanted to work on cool tech, but it really doesn't make sense to build your own tech anymore, except in very rare circumstances. It's just far too, just from a straight up business perspective. So, and you look at Unreal, the work they've done there, Unity, it's plug and play. There's just not really any reason to go there. Now, that's not to say somebody couldn't come up with something. I'm sure if Carmack sat down, he could probably come up with some kind of VR engine that would beat everyone else. But if you're just trying to make awesome entertainment experiences, my advice would be to license something.
Yeah, I mean, I think the advantage is, you can make a really tuned, very well tuned VR engine. I'm sure it would be amazing. But I think the cost difference in it is like, is that worth the time to get, a 10 or 20% better improvement over the engine rather than just getting a tool set out of the box? Because the engine is more than the renderer, right? It's the tool set, it's the prototyping tools, it's the, all the stuff that you don't have to worry about and have a team building up. There's a lot of sunk cost to that. And if you build an engine from scratch, focused around VR, I'm sure it'd be very good at the end product, but you still have to invest a lot of the time. How much time would you lose in the tool set and during prototyping and waiting for things to work? And for maybe a 10 to 20% gain in some aspect, maybe improve the latency. But I think one of the ways of the future is to have a VR specific renderer plug into the engine, like the optimizations that are there. To improve the frame rate and reduce the latency, kind of are modular at this point because we've gotten a lot better at making engines in the past few years than we were in the past. So it's much easier to kind of snap in a VR-specific renderer or a mobile renderer or a high-end console renderer and interchange those parts. So I see more of the future being like, hey, somebody makes a really good rendering tech that clamps into the other existing engines.
And that's work that you guys are doing, Joe. I noticed, Steam VR gives us a lot of technology that the game developer doesn't have to worry about. Kind of a lot of those problems you're doing them for them.
I wouldn't describe it that way exactly. We're fine with anybody using whatever engine they want.
Right.
We're engine agnostic, but there is a lot of value in using an engine like Unity or Unreal, and most people are doing that. So we're perfectly happy for them to do that. We're providing a lower level toolkit than the engines in most cases. Although I would expect, much as we've done a bunch of custom work in Source 2 for our own engine to get it to be better in VR, I expect that these engines will move in a direction where they get better and better in VR over the years.
I should hope so as well, because that's my job. Yeah, I think to that point too, what they provide with Steam VR or OpenVR, it's really cool, but as an engine, we need to kind of support all the different platforms. So, the Oculus, the Steam VR, Morpheus, and all the other stuff that's coming out. So us as an engine, we try to be agnostic so you can kind of create the content once and then deploy it anywhere. So we want to solve the problems of latency and do rendering optimizations for it so the people that are creating the content don't have to worry about that, because it's a very hard problem. It's an active area of R&D.
Right.
So not everybody has that expertise.
And I will also say that it's not how big your engine is, it's how you use it. There's a lot of room in there to screw things up, and especially in VR. So like, you're saying from Eka's talk yesterday, there's still plenty of challenging things to work on. Then how do you shove some polygons down to the card?
So, Forrest, you talked about multiple users in VR earlier. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing and how people feel that changes the dynamic in VR instead of being like a solo gaming experience.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people have tried VR, but we've actually seen that because of the limitations and how few actual VR headsets are out there, not a lot of people have gotten to do a lot of multi-user VR. And it's a whole different experience, especially, there's this whole challenge. We have these different kind of design pillars, and the huge ones, avatars, and how do we represent ourselves with such limited data? We know what we can do when we have the full motion capture set up, but how do we take the Vive controllers and the Lighthouse controllers and the Vive and make that a compelling avatar? But what we found is that once you get this, there's all this idea of presence, right? Everyone talks about presence in VR. Well, we're talking about shared presence. And what that means is, in the same way with presence, you feel, the drop in your stomach when you're looking over a cliff in VR. For us, it's the more nuanced social interactions that we have. We have social bubbles that if someone gets in your face, when you have that sense of shared presence, it actually makes you really uncomfortable. And we have this funny story where at one point one of my other co-founders had turned to me and just started staring at me in VR. And I was like, "Hey, Jonathan, what's up? What are you doing? Stop it, like stop staring at me." And I got physically uncomfortable because he was just silent and staring at me. And then he disappeared and popped back in and said, "Oh, sorry, my computer crashed." And I had that moment, I was like, I got uncomfortable because I thought that was him. And I assigned that as him. And another quick story of one time when we were all sitting in VR and we were watching a big screen. We were actually watching funny cat videos, and as you do. And Jonathan was up front, and he got uncomfortable because the three of us were in the back, and he felt our eyes on the back of his head. Like he knew we were all looking and talking while we were watching the screen, but since he was like awkwardly sitting in front of us, he felt uncomfortable. And those are the kind of things that we're just scratching the surface on, these kind of social nuances that we experience every day in real life. But haven't really haven't felt that in the virtual world.
So I want you to tell the story about using a full head avatar versus kind of what you've been doing, because when you put the mask up.
Yeah. So one thing that so we've actually, when we talk about our avatars right now, we refer to them as masks because that is literally what the Oculus Rifts that we're developing on are. And that one thing that we've noticed is, especially in the developing environment where you might have to pop up the headset, peek at your keyboard because we haven't solved the keyboard problem. You have to look and look at your keyboard. The other person sees something very disturbing if you have a whole head. They just see the person's head snap and their neck just snapped. And when you see that as a real person, it's very disturbing. It's like, if any one of our necks just bent back 90 degrees right now, it'd be pretty messed up. Yeah. And so what we've done right now so far, and as we're experimenting, we have masks. And so when someone actually takes their helmet, their kind of headset off and puts it on the top of their head while they're working, you can see that there's an invisible head, and the mask kind of rotates up and sits on the invisible head. There's this idea of negative space, in which you don't need to show something for your mind to fill in the gaps. And that's something that we found is that when you have if you have like a humanoid head, especially if it has a neck hole, it's real weird.
We had a multiplayer VR experience that we were playing around with a couple of years ago that we discovered similar things where we had two users in the same space, and the user was represented by a box with a really crudely drawn Microsoft Paint smiley face on one side. And so when you first get in there, you put your thing on, you put your headset on, and you see the other player, and they were playing like face pong or something. Like you hit the ball with your face and try to hit the other guy with it.
Man, Valve's really advanced game designing graphics.
It was a pretty advanced game with advanced graphics.
What are you doing over there?
And so you see the box on the floor, and then you see the person pick up the headset, and all right, somebody's holding the headset. And then they put it on their head, and suddenly it becomes a person because it starts moving like a person. And it's still the same box. It still doesn't look anything like a person. But as soon as it starts moving like a person moves, it becomes a person.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a social site called Converge. I don't know if you guys have tried it. It's converge.co, and it's just masks around a campfire. But there's people there, I've never met them in real life, but I actually feel like I've met them because it's a mask that moves like someone's head, and you feel like it's actually real. So.
Yeah, we had a similar experience to what you were talking about, where we were hooking up a game called Couch Nights, where the premise was two people in an apartment sitting on their couches, and we were going to replicate the motion of the HMD and then just use IK to fake the avatar there. And I was working on that one night, and the other guy that had the other dev kit was in North Carolina, where our company's headquartered. So we were kind of transcoastal, talking over Skype, whatnot. And we were working on the gameplay side of it, and I just submitted a build real quick while I was in the middle of trying to get the network replication for the players to work. So I didn't think it was turned on, and I'd never seen it work before. So we were testing the gameplay, and I noticed he was kind of like leaning over and getting into it. And I'm like, wow, that's cool. And then he noticed at the exact same time that I noticed him, and he looked up, and he gave me this, like, what's up, bro nod thing. It was like, it's the bro nod heard around the world, man. But it was so cool because it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't take a lot of, fidelity in motion, just that that a human is on the other side of that. You posit so much kind of character onto them. It's really quite remarkable.
So I actually have a theory that, many of you probably have worked on development teams at different times, and I've always kept our dev teams kind of centrally located, right? Yeah, you can work from home every once in a while, but having someone in, say, North Carolina wouldn't be my favorite thing. So I have this theory that VR is going to completely disrupt the concept of office space in teams, because if you've tried to work over Skype, you know that you can do it, but it's not even close to optimal. But I really feel strongly that with the work Forrest is doing, that others are doing, that you will be able to have team presence and kind of get that feeling even though you're not physically in the same location. So my advice is not to invest in office buildings right now. Invest in VR instead.
All right. So where does that take us? Does that take us to the world of like Ready Player One, or is it more like Idiocracy, where people are just cocooned away, sitting on a couch, eating food through a straw?
Well, I feel pretty strongly that it's going to take us to a world that is actually a lot better than what we see right now. And it's kind of this convergence between VR and AR. And we believe that they will essentially become the same thing at some point when pass-through modes in VR get really good and AR has really good VR modes, and eventually it just won't matter. And at that point, you can eliminate things like screens. So think of a household where you don't need to center your living room around a big TV. You can just have a nice living room that's about sitting and talking. That you can have an office space that I'd say looks like it's from the early 20th century. And you don't have to have monitors plastered all everyone's desk. You can just have desks and then virtual monitors that are floating there. So I see it as a world in which you can get up and move around much more than one that you're trapped in one spot.
Brain on toilet.
I knew you were going to say that.
Well, you teed it up so well, but I don't know. I mean, personally, I'm torn. I do think that Forrest is right, and that this vision of an awesome AR glasses type of world, Internet of Things, everything's connected. That sounds pretty good. I'm not so sure that's what we're going to see, but I'll keep an open mind on that one. But I do think there's going to be shut-ins that just don't go anywhere or do anything and order everything from Amazon Fresh and Pizza Hut through the Pizza Hut Xbox app or something.
Yeah, I mean, you see that with TVs right now. It's not as immersive as VR, but people still shut themselves because they have the internet, right? It's great social experience that can sub when you don't really like social experiences.
I mean, what happens if you literally don't have to leave your house? You still get the experience of bonding with other people through VR. That is kind of the Ready Player One, promise. I don't know.
And people still have a lot of meat attached to them. So, it is good to get outside, get some fresh air, move around. I don't think it's a complete...
We're talking about gamers here.
They have even more meat sometimes. Highly marbled, but... but it's still, I don't think it'll ever be a substitute for the real world, but it'll be a nice addition. Like the internet, not everybody spends all their time on the internet, but it's a tool that's with us at all times in case we want to, plug into that experience.
Yeah, I think definitely some people will, and some people will have the flexibility to live their lives kind of however they want. But especially if you think about how many people have to live lives where they travel a lot for work, exactly, right? How many people have to relocate? So especially, even in this industry and whatnot, like how many people have moved for a job? Well, imagine a world where you can stay where you want to stay. You can live where you want to live. Maybe you want to live in SoCal and surf every day, but also work in the game industries in Seattle. Like, that's something that you can't have right now, at least not as easily because of distributed teams. But I could see a world where you can stay shut in somewhere else, but then work somewhere else and still be okay.
Pretty much everybody knows somebody that lives far away that they wish they saw more. And the ability to stand next to that person in some game or some other experience, I think is pretty powerful. And I think a lot of the people who are somewhat shut in right now and their only interaction with the world is voice chat on Xbox Live will have an ability to actually be with other people that is pretty compelling.
So you think it might be an antidote to the antisocial nature of the internet? It could be.
So there's a long history of new technologies being predicted as ending war and ending human struggles, all the way from the telegraph up to today. You know, the internet was going to do the same thing. So I'm not going to make that prediction, but it may be that it will help a little bit with the way that people will say things to you over voice chat in a game that they would never say to your face. And I think that they may have more of a sense that this is another person than they have right now.
Right.
That would be a really good thing if that's the case, because the internet is, it's just bad right now. It just is. Yeah. There's a lot, and anonymity just creates evil thoughts in people, and they think they can get away with it, right? So the more humanizing that we can make the internet, I think the better off we're going to be.
And maybe it's those things that you mentioned, like the fact that you think there's a real person on the other end of the line. So. All right, so
that actually, on that subject, that's going to cause the opposite effect for AIs. So you have some virtual character there, you're going to know they're not a person pretty much instantaneously. Yeah. And you're never really going to believe that they're a person until the animation gets a lot better than it is right now.
Just like Uncanny Valley 2.0, basically.
Yeah. So to go from the sort of futuristic stuff, who's actually working on a VR title right now? A couple of people, a few people? All right, a few people. So I thought, if people are thinking about building for VR, maybe we could give them some of our thoughts on, what are the great platforms, where should they get started? Where do you think the short-term opportunities are, especially for smaller devs and indies to do things in VR?
Well, my opinion is in the short term, you're probably going to just want to be ready to go with the Vive launch on Steam. I don't know anything about it, but usually Valve's pretty good at selling games and other pieces of content. So we're certainly looking at having stuff ready for that. This is going to be a big platform war, so I think it's hard to make predictions right now. I think we're going to see a healthy competition, so you're going to want to make sure that you support everything that you can.
The one thing I would say on that subject is when you hear a bunch of people who have been working in VR for a while sit on a stage and talk about what you should do and what you shouldn't do, take all of that with a grain of salt, because none of us knows what the Quake of VR is or what the Angry Birds of VR is. If we did, then we would have already made it. And that it's a wide open field. So go try things and figure out for yourself what the killer app is.
You can't be that. All right. So we've got a few minutes left. I thought there might be some questions from the audience. Some questions there. One over there. Oh, yep, sure. Is there a microphone we can get down to? Sure. Thanks.
Hi, I'm David Macias, and I finally got it yesterday. I put on, over here in the area, I put on one of the, the Oculus, and it blew my mind. Kind of like Hard Driving did 20 years ago. I worked at Atari Coin-Op, and we did some immersive stuff, because virtuality was making money and location-based stuff. And my mind was completely blown. I understand why Zuckerberg wrote a big check. But the reason why I think he wrote a big check is because it's going to disrupt him. And so the point about user experience and social user experience, and for the mass market, outside of what games will represent a gigantic market, do you have any ideas about or predictions about for the broader mass market, what kinds of apps or services might be just waiting to turn into the next unicorn?
Maybe I'll let Joe take this one, although I do have many ideas. He seemed, no? Okay. So, I mentioned that we started a VR company called EvelopVR. I haven't really talked much about what we're doing, but we are really looking at VR as a computing platform. So how do you interact with your computer in VR? What can you do in VR that you do today? Because we do a lot of things today on the web. An example would be Amazon.com. Is someone going to create a virtual mall? I guarantee it. Is a virtual mall the correct way to shop in the internet? I'm not so sure. We want people to be able to basically take the current models that we use and allow them to slowly progress into VR. That's a primary thing that we're working on. I think when you start looking at stuff down the line like avatars, where you can go to a virtual clothing site, try on clothing, look in the mirror, show it to your friends, talk about it, hit one click, it shows up at your house. You also get the avatar item to wear virtually, that we're going to be extremely disruptive to many businesses. You know, virtual presence is going to disrupt office space. Virtual shopping is going to disrupt malls. It's very difficult to buy clothing on the internet right now, and I think this is going to allow it to happen. So I don't know how quickly this is going to occur, but I do think that, you know, there's a lot of disruption in the cards. So unfortunately, it probably doesn't really answer your question of what's going to be the hot app, you know, tomorrow, because in the short term, it's just basically a sea of foam of like trying stuff. Like Joe said, nobody knows what the thing is going to do. We're just throwing stuff at the wall and working hard and trying to figure it out. So that's some of my thoughts, I guess.
So some of our thoughts on that is basically that, especially as we talked about, there's a lot of experimentation going on and no one knows the right solution, and there's lots of apps and lots of things out there that will make people sick in a wide range of different ways. So one of the things that we're thinking about and how we're approaching our kind of multi-user experiences is how do we make something that won't make people sick, that if you know you're using what we have, it won't make you sick. And while that might not be the next killer game, that there might be a game that's really awesome that makes some people sick, and that's okay. We're taking the approach of what are all the best practices to not do that. So there's a safe place you can go. So because I'm hesitant, I am extremely sensitive to motion sickness. So someone's like, hey, try my new VR thing, and I'm deeply rooted in the VR industry. And I'm just like, oh, sorry, do you have unnatural locomotion? They're like, what? I'm like, do you use a joystick to move around? They're like, yeah. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't. I'll get really sick. So safe places to go where you know you can show someone something and it won't make them sick.
You know, there's also an interesting point there. This is something most people don't actually probably know about their friends, is how prone is any particular person to being motion sick. When I was a kid, somebody told me that they got sick from reading in the car, and I was like, wow, that's really weird. I've never heard about that before. It's not something that you necessarily talk about, but there's a broad range of sensitivity to this. And there are people that are only sensitive really at the, you know, they're sensitive unless it is absolutely perfect. And then there are people at the other end of the spectrum like myself that I literally have never been motion sick in VR or motion sick doing anything in my life. I'm pretty sure my vestibular system is messed up somehow. Just doesn't seem to work or ever make me sick, whether I'm on a boat or in VR or whatever. So you can't rely on your own sensitivity in the same way that you can't play a video game that you're creating and get too close to the controls. You can't rely on whether or not you get sick as a measure of whether or not other people are going to. So
and you get better at it over time too.
And yeah, you can get acclimated. So you have to be super extra careful about that. And maybe we'll have super tasters, people like Forrest that get sick easily. I don't know.
We actually have we call her our canary, but she's our office admin that's super, super sensitive to that stuff. So, you know, slap some Dramamine on the counter like, hey, try this out. See if she works. That's our kind of metric. But, you know, you kind of hit upon it. But I think, you know, when we talk about what's going to take off first, I'm not entirely convinced it's going to be games, because when you think about games, there's a lot of hard problems like locomotion that are very, very hard problems to solve for the mass market audience. So I think, you know, a lot of the other things, like we've seen a lot of interest from architectural visualization, you know, being able to run around a space, you know, like the kind that the Steam VR stuff provides is super powerful for an architect, because they spend so much time kind of iterating, and yet they never get the sense of the actual scale of a place or the human factors of a place until you're inside of it. And so they're super excited that, hey, I can, you know, push walls back a little bit and do those kind of tweaks where normally I'd have to build a model or something like that. You can kind of interactively edit it, and that's a super compelling experience that doesn't necessarily make people sick because you're operating in a safe space. So I think a lot of people are going to get their first good experiences in VR in areas outside of traditional games, and then eventually once we start solving those problems of locomotion and whatnot, it's going to be much easier to make games after that.
We're being really conservative in our games, right, with what we do, like super conservative.
No roller coasters?
Well, there's a roller coaster, but other than that.
Architects, whenever we've given a demo to an architect, they immediately want to buy one because it would be so valuable for them to be able to communicate visually to their clients. Because they've all worked on lots of buildings, they know kind of how this is going to translate, but the people that they're building the building for have no idea. And being able to stand in a thing that won't be built for another couple of years is pretty powerful.
Cool. Another question in the middle here? Oh, sorry, over there. Sorry.
I'm Matt from FMG Games, and I'm working on a demo that's like you're flying a ship, but it's basically you're flying and you're fighting one other guy in an arena, and the arena takes place in space, so there's no way you can like fall and die or anything like that. But I'm just wondering, what are like, I'm sure you guys have tried that, right? Like fighting another guy like while you're flying around. Just what are common pitfalls? Like what works, what doesn't work for sure? Like what maybe works with people? Like maybe this game would only work for guys that drive street bikes like me, but like is that cool? Like I mean, what are things that work for that and what doesn't?
I have no idea. Some of it will work and some of it won't. To try it on a bunch of different people, though. Try it on people who are in their 40s and see if they're getting sick. The cockpit, having a cockpit around you seems to help with some of that, though.
We have a queue forming here.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like driving a car. You have a cockpit and you have some sort of local frame of reference that really helps. I think one of you mentioned the whole dying thing, and one of my first like weird VR experiences was actually playing TF2 when I got jibbed and my head camera like rolled around in the hill. That was a bad experience.
We fixed that.
You did fix that. You know, I'm kind of glad it happened to me because it made it so I didn't have to make that mistake myself. But you know, just being like, people aren't used to dying, so you got to be kind of cognizant of that when you're, you know, blowing the ship up. You know, people get uncomfortable a lot easier than you think. So I mean, I guess a lot of people that ride like street bikes probably have a lot more tolerance for that sort of stuff. But people that are a little more skittish might be a little more hesitant of having the thing that they're riding in blow up around them.
I don't have anything to add, really, since I haven't made a cockpit game, but I don't know, DeForest?
More questions.
More questions.
So to the virtual mall thing that you were mentioning, it has obviously the potential to disrupt brick and mortar stores and put even more people shopping online for things that they would normally maybe have to go try on. But that is exactly anathema to needing people to actually try on the virtual reality headsets. So if you need them to actually to try it, to get in there. So I guess the question is for Joe, like when are we going to see Valve stores next to Apple stores for you to walk in and actually try out the different hardware? Because
you guys aren't making the hardware, right? I mean, isn't HTC just going to sell it through the normal channels?
HTC is going to sell through a bunch of channels. I don't know that we know exactly what those will be yet, but you're not going to see a Valve store. we're 350 people now. I don't think we're going to add another few thousand to run stores in a bunch of cities.
Buying VR inside VR inside VR.
I do think one thing John said was it's sort of a short-term problem. A year from now, everyone in this room will know someone that has either a CV1 or a Vive, and you can go to their house and try it.
2 more questions?
So one of the main issues I think with VR and games in VR right now are getting good menus and HUDs. What are your thoughts on making sure that they feel natural in the 3D space while still being readable? And how would you translate information like health that would be easy for the player to consume without getting sick?
I don't know if I have a good answer to you on that. I mean, Joe has done a lot of the fundamental first research into how HUD should work, and you obviously don't want to stick it to their face, which is odd because the Oculus DK2 comes up with a health and safety warning that's stuck to your face pretty much right away. But besides that, so there's been a trend in games towards moving things off the HUD and onto the character. So I think it's kind of a game-specific thing. I can tell you in that our VR title, Wayward Sky, the way that we handle the menu is you start off in a scene and there's a start. It just says start, and you look up at it and click, and that's how the game experience starts. So the menu is basically built into the game environment, and I think we'll see an awful lot of that stuff. And when you start thinking about it from the perspective of the Vive controllers, it becomes even more interesting because now you can kind of interact with it. So I think we're going to, as Joe said, we don't know what the next Quake for VR is going to be, and a lot of these are really open questions. So don't stick it to their face. That's about all I know.
Don't stick it to their face. So we've seen a bunch of different things, and you said readability, which. It
doesn't lead dangerous. I think the menu is nice, but it's really hard to read.
One part of the reason for that is these displays are not actually very high resolution. 1080 by 1200 is what the Vive has per eye, but it's 110 degree field of view. So you take your 1080p TV and you stick it to your face, and you can't, like, you see the pixels, right? that's going to get better. But having the ability to bring things closer to you so that you can read them, using big chunky fonts so that you can read them, those are important. And that's something that the Tilt Rush guys did pretty well in the demo we showed at GDC. They have their UI on one hand, and you're pointing at it, which I would do if I wouldn't have to move the mic to do it, with the other hand, and you can move it further away or closer to you, and so you can easily read it as a result.
I think the other big thing is, iconography goes a long way because it's easier to avoid rendering fonts. So I think, semiotics majors have a whole new, marketability now, where they really didn't have one before. But for most of our stuff, I think one thing that bears kind of emphasis is you have contextual, kind of more context when you're doing interactions. Like you can move like one of the Vive controllers over something and then change what the trackpad on it does using an icon or some 3D widget in the world. And as you move your finger over that, maybe you're manipulating which mode you're in. And you can kind of display that writ large rather than having to worry about looking down at like a cheat sheet on a controller. But the other thing we've kind of noticed conversely was when we put Xbox controllers in people's hands, even people that profess to play games, they can't really find the buttons all the time, right? We cheat a lot more than I think we give ourselves credit for, especially hardcore gamers. So not being able to see that because you have something on your face is a gigantic handicap that people have to be really aware of.
So that's also something that we've done a lot of work on, is actually trying to solve that particular problem. And I think we have some interesting camera-based solutions for blending the real world and the VR world together. I had this theory that you didn't actually need to see your keyboard to use it, and so I removed all the letters from my keyboard by getting one of those DOS keyboards just to kind of try to eat my own dog food even without the VR helmet on. And yeah, it turns out you don't need to, but it's better if you can.
I think we have one more question.
I think if it's brief. Okay, yeah, no.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.